Hi, I'm Jess Forrester, and welcome to Vitae Wednesday. Today we're going to spend an hour learning how to prepare for a campus visit. Today's webinar will be available to view on demand. Everyone who registered for this webinar will receive a link to the recording, so look for an email from Vitae notifying you that it is ready. Or check go.chroniclevitae.com/webinars, which is where all of our archived webinars are stored. On that same page, you'll also see registration links for our upcoming webinars. Karen is coming back March 8th to talk about how to organize a job talk, and she'll help you understand how to negotiate a job offer on April 12th. If you are tweeting along with us today, please use the hashtag VitaeWednesday. And if you have technical issues during the webinar, you'll want to refresh your browser. If that doesn't work, you may want to switch to another browser. Vitae Wednesday webinars work best on either Chrome or Firefox. If you're still having technical issues, please either tweet them to @ChronicleVitae, or you can email me directly at jess.forrester@chronicle.com. Last but not least, Karen will join us for 1 hour following the webinar to answer your questions. So please submit questions for Karen at go.chroniclevitae.com/campusvisit. And with that, I'll let Karen get us started.
All right. Thank you so much, Jess. I'm delighted to be here for another Vitae Wednesday webinar, this time on the campus visit, which in some ways might be the most fraught, most anxiety-producing element of the entire job search process, especially if it's your first time. Then it really is a scary proposition. So I hope today's webinar will reassure you a little bit about what is going to happen so that you come into it very well prepared, knowing what to expect. As always, and you know this if you've been to my previous webinars, there is a lot more information available for you in my book, which is called The Professor is In, The Essential Guide to Turning Your PhD into a Job. So it has several chapters on elements of the campus visit. And then it also has chapters on the job talk specifically, on negotiating, and then all kinds of other issues related to the academic job search and the academic career, including even the post-academic transition, things like grant writing, and so on. So do please check that out. All right. So today our agenda is to talk about different aspects of the campus visit, to really break them down so you know what's going to happen. So as always with my webinars, we're going to start with the big picture. What's the point of this thing? What are they looking for? When they invite you to a 2-day campus visit, what are they looking for? What are the criteria they're evaluating? And what is the biggest mistake that people make? Then we'll talk through the very nitty-gritty details of what can you expect to happen and how do you arrange it and how do you prep for it, and what happens in the meetings that you have with the faculty, the department head, the dean, and the graduate students. We will then talk about the specific formal interview with the search committee, which is, in fact, part of most campus visits. And then we will talk a little bit about the job talk, but it isn't going to be a lot today, and that's because I have, as Jess mentioned, a whole other webinar coming up on specifically on the job talk. And believe me, this subject needs an entire webinar. Frankly, the subject of the job talk could be the topic of an entire book, I think, given all the ways that it can go wrong. Sorry to be so negative, but job talks are really hard. So I am going to say a little bit about them and about the Q&A, but please do come back next month for the webinar on specifically on the job talk. We're going to say a little bit about the teaching demo, but actually I'm also going to talk a bit more about the teaching demo next month as well, since that's often folded into the job talk or accompanies the job talk, so it's really in a way part of the same topic. We will say some things about some of the elements of a campus visit that are not the formal interview portion, but are just as challenging, like how do you eat, and when do you eat, and what do you eat, and how do you handle questions that are problematic and shocking and outrageous and maybe illegal, and evaluating campus climate to see whether you'll be happy there. And we'll say a few words about what to wear, although not very much. I know from years of giving talks on the campus visit that some people are obsessed with the question of what do I wear, and then the other half of the audience is like, I can't believe we're wasting our time talking about what to wear. So I try to split the difference and just say a little bit. And again, I do want to remind you, just as Jess said, that you can join me. In fact, I want you to join me in the discussion afterwards. I'll be there for at least an hour answering your questions. I've already been answering your questions all week, and in fact, some of your questions are folded into this webinar, but you may have follow-up questions after this webinar, and so please ask them, and I'll answer them to the best of my ability. All right, so here is the list of the 3 key criteria of the campus visit, and it's not what you probably think. Because what you probably think, and I know this from all these years working with clients and working with my own students, is you probably think you have to get there and then desperately prove to them that you are a legitimate scholar and that you deserve the job. That is absolutely incorrect. That is the single biggest misperception that job candidates have. The fact is, if they have invited you to a campus visit, they already know that you are a legitimate candidate for the job. They already know that you are terrific, that your written research, your scholarship, your publications, the way that you've described your teaching, they have been extremely persuasive. Consider them persuaded. They believe you. You're already great in their eyes. So what you're actually doing is simply walking in and sort of maintaining that. Are you as smart as you seem in writing? You don't have to prove anything new. They don't need any new information. You just have to show that in a really collegial, interpersonal, live sort of way, you are everything that you came across as in your written materials. They also need to know, are you tenurable? They're really looking for that. And this is going to surprise you because you may still be ABD. You may not have finished your dissertation, and you're like, what? They want to know if I'm tenurable? Well, I can assure you they do. They do not want to go through all of the expense and hassle of running this search only to hire someone who can't get past the third-year review or tenure 6 years down the line. And they need assurances that you do indeed have a plan for the 3-year mark and the 6-year mark in terms of getting through your tenure case. Now, whether that's research-oriented or teaching-oriented depends on what kind of institution you're interviewing at. But you have to already be looking ahead. You can't be acting like a grad student who's obsessed with your dissertation. That's an obsolete identity. And I'll return to this idea. Even if you are still a grad student, it doesn't matter. And then finally, are you an appealing colleague? Are you somebody who is engaging with them as a peer, as a colleague, as someone who's friendly and interesting, and who is interested in their initiatives and their lives and their research and their teaching concerns? Are you able to engage on a human level? So are you neither an obsequious grad student, coming across as an obsequious grad student, or an entitled jerk? And both of those are kind of pitfalls that candidates can fall into. So the single biggest pitfall for most candidates that I work with is the former problem, not the latter, meaning you act more like a grad student. There are people who act like entitled jerks, for sure, but they're a minority, and the majority who do have a problem, the problem that they have is they act too juvenile, too insecure. They do not comport themselves like a peer. So they're not, you may still be a grad student. I don't care. I don't care what your status is. It does not matter. They're not hiring a grad student. They've already got a program full of grad students. If they're running a PhD program, they've got 50 of them right there in the department. They don't need another one. They're hiring a colleague. They're hiring a faculty member. They're hiring a peer. You have to comport yourself like that, and it's very difficult to make that transition. Now, I talk more about the details of how you make that transition in a different webinar, which is the one on interviewing. So please do. That's another free webinar that I did last month. So by all means, check that out, because it's going to go into a little bit more detail about specific speaking strategies and body language strategies that you have to master to make sure you're not coming across like a grad student instead of a peer. So I'm not going to go over that today, but that information is available to you for free from Vitae. So for today, I just want you to know that whether the degree to which you have accomplished this is being scrutinized from the moment you arrive. It's absolutely true. If someone has told you that, they are telling you the truth. You step off that plane, you step out of the gate, or whatever baggage claim to where they're picking you up at the airport, and you are being evaluated. Whether it's a grad student who's picking you up, a staff member, a faculty member, could be any of those, it could be someone else, but you are going to get picked up at the airport most likely, and they are going to instantly begin drawing impressions of you. So you do need to take care to be prepared from that first moment until that moment that you disappear into the airport at the end of your visit, that you are disciplining your self-presentation so that you do, in fact, come across as a peer who is both very collegial and who, both in the sense of not behaving like a grad student who is subordinate to those colleagues, and also not like, as I said before, an entitled jerk. All right, here is a campus visit. Now, I want to tell you, of course, these vary. Of course they do. This is just one example. But I would say in my entire academic career that spanned 4 different departments, because I had joint appointments in 2 departments on 2 different campuses, this is exactly what they always looked like. So, and I was at an R1, or at R1s. So I think this is quite common for a certain kind of campus, and then maybe sometimes it gets shorter in length when the campus is smaller and may have a smaller budget to be able to devote to these. So the point is you fly in and you typically arrive late afternoon. You get picked up at the airport. You get taken to the hotel where you drop off your bags, and then you get picked up to be taken to dinner, and dinner is with a group of faculty and grad students. So you're on right from that point. No matter how tired you are, no matter how jet-lagged you are, you're on. Dinner is over. They take you back to the hotel. You start the next morning with breakfast with more faculty, more grad students. Again, I say grad students assuming there's a grad program in the department. If there isn't a grad program, then you're not going to be meeting with grad students. You may meet with undergrad students. It depends on what kind of school it is and how closely they will involve students in the search. That's going to vary quite a bit, so I can't tell you what to expect on that front. But they might get invited to meals. Anyway, so yeah, and this breakfast will be about 8 o'clock, and then after that, you will probably have individual meetings that are typically 30 minutes in length with a number of different faculty members. You should get this schedule for the whole thing ahead of time. A well-organized department will, a few days before your visit, get you the schedule, and you'll know exactly who you're meeting. And that's what you want, and I'm going to explain why that is momentarily. At some point, and now from this point onward, everything is going to be, the order I have it in is completely random and could completely differ. You know, there's no particular reason for this order that I put them in. You may at this point have a formal interview with the search committee. That could last as long as 2 hours. You will probably get a campus tour that will probably be led by a grad student. You may have a real estate tour if the campus is in a town where you can still afford to buy houses. They may take you around so you can see what's available. You will have lunch with faculty and grad students. You will probably have a meeting just with the grad students if there's a grad program. You'll have more individual meetings. You will have an individual meeting with the department head. That will typically be an hour in length as opposed to the 30 minutes that you devote to the individual faculty. Now, typically in all of my departments, our job talks were always at 4 p.m. I don't know why, they just always were. And so they will typically give you about 30 minutes in a private office that you're borrowing to get your thoughts together and prepare yourself for the job talk. Then you give the job talk. That is typically 45 minutes. Then there is typically 30 minutes of Q&A after that, if not an entire hour. And then they oftentimes have a wine and cheese reception in the department, and then they will take you out to dinner. So if this feels like an excruciatingly long exhausting day? It absolutely is. Absolutely. And then you wake up the next morning and you again have breakfast with a group of students or somebody, faculty, and then you may meet the dean, and that'll typically be 30 minutes because deans don't have that much time, or maybe the provost if you're on a small campus, and then you will get driven to the airport and you will depart. So does this sound grueling? Yeah, it is grueling. Okay, so when you get invited, there are a number of issues to contemplate about this, and I actually start here because in a way, I started out by saying you're being scrutinized from the minute that you get off the airplane. But to tell you the truth, you're kind of being examined from the minute you respond to the invitation, even if that's on the phone or by email. On the phone or by email. So you actually want to give some thought to how you answer, how you respond to the invitation itself. So, of course, you want to be very warm and, friendly, but don't be gushing. Don't suddenly, oh, my gosh, I am so grateful for this opportunity. What an incredible honor this is. I'm so delighted. Don't do that. That's what you don't do. You're a professional, you stay kind of reserved. Oh, thank you so much. I'm very happy to hear about this invitation. I would be delighted to visit. I'd like to talk to you about the scheduling because I do have some obligations coming up in the near future. That was a quote. So make sure the dates they offer work for you. And if you have other campus invitations, it's good to let them know that. You don't have to name names of other campuses. You are not obliged to do that. But it's very good for them to know that you have other invitations because you look more desirable. And the more desirable you look, the better, the more they're going to want you. When they know other people want you, that makes them want you more. So that's good. And if you have to do a little bit of, maneuvering to try to work out the schedule of multiple campus visits, that's a good thing, and don't overly apologize for that because that just shows that you're a rock star and that you are a highly desirable commodity. Sorry to speak like that, but it's basically true. And so don't apologize that you're inconveniencing them because it's really great if you have multiple visits. Now, I want to say one thing. I do highly recommend that you not try to piggyback other agendas on a campus visit. In general, unless your discipline is having its national conference or something professional along those lines that happens to coincide with the geographical area and the time, the day of the visit, those you can work around openly. But don't try to fit in your own private agendas. Don't say, oh, my family lives nearby. I'd like to extend my stay and visit with them or something like that. It doesn't make a very professional impression, and it does show a bit of a lack of focus. So in general, you may point out exceptions to this rule, and I'd be willing to entertain them, but in general, this is a good rule to follow. Okay, so when you get this invitation, you have to research the department and the campus and write down what you learn. So it's classic, note-taking. Don't just read it, also write it. It's going to help you recall it, retain it. So look up every major faculty member who is in your particular niche that is really going to be involved in interviewing you. But I don't want to use the word niche. That's not a good word because that's too narrow. Let me give you an example from anthropology, which is my field, and you may know that it's a 4-field discipline. And so I'm a cultural anthropologist, and then there are also linguistic anthropologists, biological anthropologists, and archaeologists. Now, when I get hired, the biological anthropologists who, may well be primatologists, they're not going to be all that concerned about my research, right? They may not, if it's a big department, they're not going to be super involved in the search. They're going to interview me, they're going to talk to me, but they're not going to be, really involved. So they're not the people I'm going to really focus my preparation on. I'm really going to focus my preparation on the other cultural anthropologists and maybe on the linguistic anthropologists, and then sort of check around to see the other folks in terms of whether they're playing very, very important roles in the department, like the director of graduate studies, the director of undergraduate studies, the department chair, and so on. So focus your preparation most on the people who are closest to you and most involved in the search. But do prepare. Study the website. When you find the people, Google the individuals and find out what they've published recently and take a look at it. Skim an article, skim a book, see what they're about, know something about them, write it down so you don't forget. Study the website so that you have a sense of what the orientation of the department is. To go back to cultural anthropology, there are some departments that are very, very empiricist. They love the idea that they're a social science. They really like quantitative methods, and they love ethnography and the ethnographic method. Then there are some departments that are really, really theoretical and really like to be involved with social theory and really want to really talk theory and teach theory. Now, I, as a candidate, am going to prepare completely differently for those two different cultural anthropology positions. So please extrapolate for your own field and make sure that you understand that going in, because it really makes or breaks your candidacy. And do try to get a sense of the undergrad and grad students, particularly the grad students if it's a PhD program, because you're going to meet with them and they're going to want to see evidence that you have looked into what they're doing, that you might even know some of their names, that you did bother to look at the website. Believe me, they will notice and they will care. Now, after you've done all of that for the department itself, then you branch outward and you look at the interdisciplinary centers on campus, like maybe the Center for Gender Studies, the Center for Democracy Studies, anything like that you might be involved in. You may actually visit some of them, but it's good to know what's going on and what kind of funding they offer. That's another thing. And then, speaking of funding, you also want to have a sense of what is the financial state of the campus and the department. And this isn't easy. I'm not saying this is easy. You can't just come out and ask it. But you might Google it. And, if you're looking at Wisconsin, if you have to have been under a rock for the last 2 years if you're not aware of the budgetary crisis of the Wisconsin state system, for example. That's just one example, not to pick on Wisconsin. But there are there are some state systems that have been under really, really serious financial crisis, and you really want to figure that out by basically using Google, looking at local newspaper, looking at the campus newspaper. The internet is your friend here. I mean, I can't even believe that we used to go to campus visits in the era before the internet. I don't know what we did, honestly. So just be glad you have the internet. And then really look into a question of the level of dynamism of the department. Is it, is it hosting speaker series? Is it housing journals? What kind of stuff does it have going on? And that's just so you know it better, so you have a sense of something to talk to them about. So when you're over lunch and you say, hey, I saw that your brown bag lunch series that you just brought in so-and-so last week. How was that? I saw him talk at, Stanford last year, and he was fantastic. And suddenly, boom, you're in a great conversation. All right, so the last aspect of prepping for the visit, and prepping for the visit is really the most important thing that I'm going to really talk about in terms of the campus visit, is prepping. You also have to prep for basic interview skills, which means please, again, go back to my free interview webinar and review that, because basic interview skills have to be used here too. Nothing changes. Even though you're going to be on campus for 48 hours for a campus visit, that doesn't mean that you should do a 48-hour monologue, okay? That means you're still doing basic human dialogue. You speak for 30 seconds, they speak for 30 seconds. You speak for 1 minute, they speak for 1 minute. We're still using basic human communication patterns. So you have to prep for for good interview practices, which means not blathering on and rambling for hours at a time. All right. So the principles here are to have a concise, factual, evidence-based summary of your research, your teaching, your publication plans, so on. All right. Oh, and here we are.
Hey, Karen, we're having a sound issue. Could you make sure that you're properly plugged in?
Yeah, I seem to be plugged in. I haven't moved or anything.
I can hear you now. Go ahead.
Okay. So were people able to hear that last little bit?
I don't think people were able to hear just on this slide.
Okay.
The previous slide, slide 18.
Okay, this one right here. Okay, so just here, this is the webinar that I have been mentioning, Acing the Academic Interview. So by all means, please find this webinar and review it when you are prepping for your campus visit. Okay, now this is where you're going to use those interview skills, is most particularly in the short meetings with faculty, which are only 30 minutes in length. So it's very important you don't drone and you don't ramble. So you have to focus on the content tailored to the job, to the department, and to this particular faculty member. So if they invite you into their office and say, hello, we're so happy you're here. I was very excited to see your file come in. I really wanted to talk to you as the other Asia specialist in this department. I wanted to talk to you about how you would teach an Anthropology of East Asia course. Now, I'm, of course, a Japan anthropologist. That's why I'm using this as an example. And say the person I'm talking to is a China anthropologist. We are going to connect over the issue of East Asian anthropology. But if I walk in and talk to someone who's a Latin American specialist, well, maybe we're going to end up talking about teaching the intro course, or maybe we'll talk about a specific research methodology or a theory. So the point is you have to tailor your answers to the person that you're meeting and try to make a human connection with their interests. Now, having said that, you want to deliver a consistent message across all of your interviews. That means that when you're done and you leave, and they meet up and they discuss the three people who were invited, and they say, Kelsey's the one who does blah, 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 that everybody in the room is like, yeah, Kelsey does blah, 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 and everybody has a fairly similar understanding of that blah, 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 because you have been consistent. You have not tried to be all things to all people. You have stayed true to your research platform. Now, I'm not going to define what I mean by a research platform here, or I should say a scholarly platform, because it encompasses teaching and administration as well. But this is something I want you to go to my book and look at, because I elaborate there. What is your platform? It's like a campaign platform. I know campaigns are a very sore subject for us right now, but if you can remember, years past and happier campaigns, if you were Obama campaigning for the presidency, Obama had a platform, and you need to have a platform as a candidate who's campaigning for this job. So make sure that you deliver a consistent platform in all of those meetings, even if you discuss different elements of it with different people. And then again, like I said, connection, finding a way to connect your interest to the interest of the person you're speaking to. So here is just a script of language that a person might use. They say, well, what are you working on? And you say, well, recently I have been turning my attention to the question of blah, blah, blah. And I noticed that you deal with that question in your last book that I was just reading, and I'd love to talk to you about it. I found blah, blah, blah. What did you find? And suddenly you're in a dialogue. Okay. So that's how you handle the short meetings. And actually, I have a lot more I could say about all of these elements, but we don't have much time. So I'm going to be moving quickly through all of the elements. Now, the formal interview with the search committee is kind of the, what do I want to call this, kind of the dark horse of the campus visit, because people tend to forget that this is going to happen because they think it already did happen, because it so often happened at a conference stage or a Skype stage. And the candidate feels like, well, I already went through those basic questions, so that's done now, and I'm going to move on to new stuff. Actually, it's not done. All of those same questions are probably going to come back in almost identical form at the campus visit. And there are going to be more of them, and they're going to be longer, but it's going to be just the same. They're going to want to know, tell us about your research. And don't get all weird and be like, well, I already told you about it. We just Skyped last week. Like, what, did you forget? No. They need to hear it again. They need to hear it the same way. Maybe elaborate it slightly longer, since now you've got a 2-hour block in total instead of 30 minutes. But the point is they need to hear the same stuff again. So they're going to ask you basic questions. Tell us about your dissertation. Tell us about your current research. Tell us about your 5-year plan for tenure. Tell us about your publication plan. Tell us how you would teach our intro course. How would you teach our methods course? Tell us about, a couple of courses that you would like to develop for us that are original. Why do you want to work here? How do you see your work intersecting with the work that we do here at the department? These are basic interview questions, and if you're freaking out and you're like, oh my gosh, I didn't get all those down, just go back to that other webinar where they're all in a slide, and you'll get to hear lots and lots about how to answer them. Now, don't forget to carry copies of your syllabi with you, because this is a very helpful, prop. Yeah, that's a very helpful prop for you to use. So they say, well, tell us a course that you would develop for us. You pull out a syllabus and say, well, here's a syllabus for a course I was thinking of. And you pull it out and you pass it around, and then they have it there to look at. All right. Now, when you meet with the department heads, this is going to be somewhat more administrative. The department head, and by the way, I was a department head for 5 years, so I know about how these meetings went. I had lots of meetings with candidates. And typically what I did, and what other department heads did that I knew of, we used the time to explain to you the conditions of the job. So what is the tenure timeline? What are the tenure expectations? What are the teaching expectations? What are the service expectations? What are the leave policies? If you get a major grant, are you going to be permitted to take leave? What are the conditions for leave? Is there a junior sabbatical program or isn't there? Things like that. Now, the department head is not going to get into nitty-gritties of your field work, your methodology, your theory. That's for the faculty to do. Department head is really evaluating you as, are you going to be a good departmental citizen? Are you going to be a grown-up? That's how I used to put it all the time. Is this person going to be a grown-up? Are they going to pull their weight as a departmental citizen? When I, as the head, need to put together the curriculum committee, am I going to be able to call on you? Are you going to do it? And are you going to be competent? That's what I was looking at. And this is with a total understanding that you're new. You've never done it before. You're just starting out. Also, that you need to be protected from too much service. Everybody knows that, or should know it. So it's with an understanding, but still, we're really looking at you like, are you really going to be a colleague? So keep that in mind. Don't volunteer for service, though, because we don't need you to volunteer to do every service job in the entire department. That doesn't make you hireable. That actually makes you unhireable, because then we're like, oh, God, she has no idea how to get tenure at this department, and we need her to get tenure. Going back to that first slide, we're evaluating your tenure ability. So if you're at an R1 and it's research focused, then we're going to want to make sure primarily as a department head that your mind is on research and not on the teaching and not on the service. Conversely, if you're at a teaching college, the head's going to be scrutinizing you to see if your mind is on the teaching, and that you're not some kind of research prima donna who is demanding all kinds of leave time and stuff like that. Now, when you meet with the dean, this is an interesting meeting that's somewhat hard to predict. I feel in my life's experience in the academy that there tended to be 3 different kinds of deans. I call them the explanatory, the budgetary, and the intellectual. I encountered all of them at different points, and my clients and my students have encountered all of them at different points. Sometimes the dean is just sits you down and then talks at you for 30 minutes where they simply explain the retirement plan and all kinds of stuff like that. And you just listen, mostly listen quietly and ask a few clarifying questions. Budgetary deans are obsessed with the budget, which frankly all deans are obsessed with the budget. That's their job, is to be obsessed with the budget. And so they may say things to you like, so we are going to be needing you to teach a large class of 400 students, and at the same time, the department's budget is going to be cut by 20%, and you will have fewer TAs to assist you. Are you prepared to take on that challenge? And the only answer to that is, well, yes, of course I could take on that challenge, and here is how I would do it. So that's what the kind of line a budgetary dean takes. An intellectual dean will ask big picture questions. How do you see your field changing in the next 5 years? What do you think the most influential book is in your field, and why? And they're going to push you to go there, and you're going to need to be prepared to speak like a thought leader in your field. Really have that confidence to say, well, in fact, the most important book in our field is blah, blah, blah by so-and-so that just came out last year from California, and the reason it's so important is that it's blah, 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 and you deliver that, and that's what you're required to do. Now, when you are meeting with the grad students, you want to be sure that you prepare, because they often do have a vote. So that means they have one vote for all the grad students, but they take that vote very, very seriously. Don't talk down to them. Don't dismiss them. Don't treat them like they're unimportant, because they aren't. They are important. So show a genuine interest in their work and demonstrate the knowledge that you gained by researching them on the website ahead of time. But do keep in mind that you're not a peer, and it doesn't matter even if you're like 25 years old and they're 25 years old, or you're 25 years old and they're all 30 and 40 years old, or 50 years old, and you feel really, really weird talking to them as a potential, authority figure. You are nevertheless an authority figure. That's the position you're applying for. So you're not their friend. You're not their buddy. You are someone who is going to be coming into a position of authority. Now, here's the first question from the group. I was recently on a campus visit, not sure how many candidates they were bringing, and should I ask? You don't ask. You don't ask. It's and I can't. Sometimes one of the things as a cultural anthropologist, I love to be able to explain the cultural values behind the weird things that we do in the academy, but sometimes there aren't any. And this is one of those times. There isn't really a reason you don't ask. It's just, quote, unquote, not done. It's just not done. You just don't ask. You don't allude to the existence of other candidates. You just go along as if you are the only person in the world who is interviewing for this job. I can't tell you why we do it that way. We just do. So please don't ask. All right. You're now at the job talk. The job talk is the make or break part. It is the most important part. It is the reason I have been part of the webinar for those students. I hope you come back for it and turn up on the job talk and get the job. So there is a lot to say about it. We don't have much time today, but as I said, I'll talk more later next month. But you have to end on time. If they have told you it's a 45-minute talk, you had better make sure that talk is 45 minutes, and frankly, 44 minutes is probably better. And then you have to be prepared for the Q&A. A few basic ideas about the job talk. Don't just grimly read your paper. Make eye contact, gesture, move around, practice being a dynamic speaker, practice your job talks, give mock job talks in front of audiences who then ask you hard questions. You need practice. The job talk, let me see if I have. Oh, no. Okay, so this is my only slide on the job talk. I want to tell you that the organization is tricky because you will, left to your own devices, you will go too narrow. You will dig down into some obscure detail of your research that is going to put everybody to sleep. We need to start out with a big overarching view of what do you work on. You need to introduce the topic in basic, sort of upper-level, undergrad-level language. Remember, they have not heard your topic before. You have to sketch your methods and the literature you depend on, but only in about a paragraph each. So literally just a paragraph on lit, paragraph on methods or so, and then you move on to the meat of your research, to your findings, and then to your conclusion. All right, I'm going to stop there. Now, it's really important that you get some experience handling Q&A, and there's only one way to get that, and that is by practice. You have to practice. It's one of the reasons I tell students to go to conferences and give papers, because you have to have the practice of handling Q&A, particularly challenging questions. Now, there's a link here. It's called How Women Can Speak Better in Public, but it is applicable to anybody, including men. But you can, if you look at it, I do a little bit of role playing. It's a little hokey, low production values. I made it long, long, long ago. I was very first year as the professors did. But I do role play a good response to a challenge and a bad response to a challenge. So the point is, you don't want to crumble. You want to hold firm to your points, even in the face of challenge. I mean, you stay collegial. Thank you so much for that question. That's a very valuable question. I'm so glad that came up, because it gives me the opportunity to clarify a difference between my approach and the approach of others who have worked on this topic. While others have focused on blah, 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 I focus on blah, 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 and therefore that leads me to the conclusion, blah, blah, blah. See what I did there? That's how you do it. All right. So as I said, I will be talking about the job talk next month. Now, the teaching demo is challenging because you're teaching students you don't know. And you have no idea what the politics of the classroom is, whether they're going, what the prep level is, whether they're going to do the readings. So it's very important that you get complete information on the expectation. You need to know, what is the class, who are the students, how have they been prepped, do they do reading, what reading have they done, if you assign the reading, will they do it, what level are they, and so on. But even after having done all that, please don't assume that they've done the reading, because if you base a lesson plan on the fact that they did and then they didn't, you're going to bomb, and it's going to be awful. So give them a chance to read in class. I suggest you do a little introductory lecture, introduce yourself, introduce the topic, then give them a 5 to 10 minute reading. They do it right there in class. Then break them up into groups where they do a little discussion, then pull them back together into a whole class thing, then end with a summary that is you, again, taking control of the discourse, and then concluding the class on time. That way you can avoid, putting your fate in the hands of some undergraduates who didn't do the reading. And that actually happened to me once. That's why I have such conviction about this. All right, here's another question from the group. So you've said the campus visit starts at the moment they pick you up, which, yeah, I said again today. And how can we prepare? Well, I just spent quite a bit of time on how to prepare. It doesn't feel truly informal, even if they ask you very common questions about the weather and your trip. And it's true. It is just as I said. It isn't exactly informal. It's an interview. The whole darn thing is an interview. I remember once I was at a lunch, and a faculty member turned to me and said, "Karen, how would you teach blah, blah, blah?" And I was very inexperienced at this time. And I said, "Gosh, I don't know. How would you teach it?" Yeah, not a conversation. That's a totally normal thing that I get to say to my friend, not a thing I get to say in an interview. I needed to have an answer. So yeah, you can't let your guard down. You have to have answers for stuff. So now this questioner goes on. We may have dinner or lunch with directors, the dean, so on. What should we say? What should we talk about? Well, thank you for asking this, Helen, because the meals are really, really, in my personal opinion, the most challenging part of a campus visit. So I'm actually going to talk about how to handle meals. The first thing, there's some basic pragmatics around meals. Do you have food allergies? If you do, let them know explicitly and clearly, and don't leave anything to their imagination. They may not understand the issues. If you say, "I am celiac," they may not know what that means. If you say, I personally, Karen, I have an anaphylactic tree nut allergy. And nobody knows what that means. Nobody even knows what a tree nut is. And so I can't just say, I can't eat nuts. I have to say, I cannot go to a Middle Eastern or to an Indian restaurant because, unfortunately, as much as I enjoy those cuisines, they often hide tree nuts in them, and I could get very sick and maybe die. So maybe I won't say that last bit. It's a little over dramatic, but the point is you have to be really explicit. Now, when you're at the meal, you are being interrogated. You are, and it's very difficult to eat. So first of all, don't be distracted by your food. Order food that's easy to eat. So a filet is very easy to cut off a little piece and transport that on your fork to your mouth with no mishaps. But if you order pasta, those noodles could be swinging around, splattering spaghetti sauce all over the front of your white silk shirt. I'm not saying that ever happened to me. If you order a croissant, you could end up with croissant crumbs literally all down your front. There's all kinds of things. Soup, somewhat hard to eat gracefully. So make sure you order things that you know you can eat gracefully, that you don't have to think, and I don't mean because gracefulness is the goal. What I mean is so you don't have to think about what you're doing. So they just, the food just gets consumed without you needing to put any brain power into it because your brain is going to be distracted with the questions. Also, do be aware of the price of the things you're ordering. Do not order the filet mignon. It is inconsiderate. You don't have to order the cheapest thing on the menu. Just aim for the middle. And then in terms of dessert and coffee, and your appetizers, please take your cues from others. Also with wine and alcohol, please take your cues from others. It's fine if you're a non-drinker. You don't need to drink. No pressure there. If you do drink wine, don't just automatically order it. Make sure that, it's sort of part of the kind of culture of the department to order wine. Oh, okay. So I want to answer the previous question then about what do you talk about. So I have a blog post, and I think that it made it into my book, but I actually can't remember. But the blog post is called "How to Make Small Talk on a Campus Visit." I literally wrote a post on this because so many people have asked me. And the point is that academics have a tendency to talk about fairly similar things. They will talk about current news. You can bet they're going to talk about Trump. There's no way they're not. So read up on what's going on with the latest outrage. I would tell you to get your news from a liberal source, or at least a moderate to semi-liberal source, by which I mean the New York Times, the Washington Post. Those are probably the best. You could read The Nation. You could read, or you could go, you could read Huffington Post. But the point is that academics tend to, not universal, but tend to share a fairly liberal, vocabulary of talking about politics. And what else really is there to talk about at this point? Otherwise, you might be able to talk about recent films, but they would tend to be the indie films, the intellectual films, like Senses, for example. You might talk about recent music. You could talk about, and then you also want to be aware of the micro-politics of their campus and their state. So meaning, like, again, if you're interviewing at Wisconsin, you are going to want to know about what the sort of battles have been in Wisconsin, because I can assure you that becomes the topic that a lot of faculty talk about, which is, oh, did you hear what Scott Walker did? Last week, oh my gosh, and you end up in that conversation. All right. Now, here's another question that kind of grows naturally from the previous. What are your suggestions for introverts? I have introvert qualities, believe it or not. Nobody ever believes it, but I actually really do. And to tell you the truth, and I think this will make sense to you, the reason that I have created an entire business devoted to scripting out advice for how to deal with interviews is because I'm an introvert. And it was so painful and so excruciating for me to deal with these things and so unnatural that I ended up getting very programmatic about it, very formulaic, and that's what became the origin of The Professor Is In. So believe me, I am really sympathetic to this problem. There is no simple answer to this. The fact is, you have to perform, and it's an extrovert-oriented system, and there's no way around it, and you don't get a special, escape from that because you're an introvert. You don't. I do want to draw your attention to a marvelous piece that was literally just published this week in Chronicle Vitae, and I can't remember the title, but it's something like Interviewing as an Introvert, something like that. It's on Vitae. You'll find it. And it has great advice. Really, she breaks it down into specific areas of advice. But her basic idea is this. You can't really get around it. It is what it is. So you kind of have to buck up and deal with it. Script these answers. Know what you're prepping for. And that's why a webinar like the one we're doing right now is so helpful. So you're going to minimize surprises so you don't have to improvise. Go in with prep for knowing what kinds of things you're going to want to say, and one piece of advice that she had that I really liked is we all know introverts need a little bit of downtime. Well, you may get it if they're very kind and humane, but you may not. If they don't give you little bits and pieces of downtime in your schedule, then make your own downtime. Ask to go to the bathroom. Go to the bathroom and do a 1-minute mindfulness meditation. I'm totally serious. In fact, if you have an app on your phone for it, use that app. Get a 1-minute mindfulness meditation and just do it sitting in the bathroom stall and, take that 1 minute because that is 1 minute of self-care that you gave to yourself, and it will really be helpful. All right, now let's get to another piece of nitty-gritty. You will likely not get enough to eat because you're so under pressure at the meals. So I really recommend that you pack protein bars and you nibble on them whenever you have a break so that you don't let your blood sugar kind of go haywire. All right, so now we've gotten through all of the prep and we've gotten through all of the nitty-gritty details. Now we're getting to the more intangible things, and that's where we'll end. So you do want to evaluate campus climate to have a sense of what this place is like. Will you be comfortable there? So I think that the best place to learn about this is to go to the student union if you can find a time to do it. And you sit yourself down with a cup of coffee at the table and you just eavesdrop on the conversations to get a sense of what are these students like, what do they talk about, what are their focus, what do they focus on, how do they engage with each other. Walk around the union and look at the flyers. Are there a whole bunch for the Republican student groups and none for the Green Party? Are there 25 for the Green Party and the Radicals and the Antifa, but there are none for the Republicans? This is what you're looking for. Get a sense of campus climate. Look at the posters. Look at the online calendar as well. Here's another question. Now, this is actually a two-part question. So she's been offered the opportunity to consult with faculty on race, gender, and orientation, and should I contact them if I have questions or wait until I have the offer? I actually wrote a blog post about this. It's called you know what? I can't remember what it's called. So I'll have to provide that information in the discussion group after I look it up. But it was about this exact question. Basically, it depends. The answer to the first part is it depends. If it's absolutely critical to you to know for your particular subject position whether you're going to be comfortable on this campus, then yeah, ask to meet those people right there on the campus visit. If that's been offered to you, take them up. But if it's more just like a thing, like I kind of like to know, but it's not that critical, then yeah, wait till you have the job offer. Now, the illegal questions I'm going to talk about next. So first of all, understand that most of the things we like to call illegal are not actually illegal. They're just outrageous or inappropriate. A lot of them don't, it's not strictly a legal thing. I'm not a lawyer, so I can't say. But it's going to be something like, what does your husband think about you taking this job? Swear to God, this is a question. So the point is, don't react, don't engage, stay on point. So in other words, something extremely neutral. Do not react, the most important thing. But also don't allow yourself to be the identified problem that the question is trying to make you be. That means don't engage. So let's see that question. What does your husband think about your taking this job? My husband and I have always supported each other's careers, and that will continue to return to that symposium that I was telling you about over lunch, blah, 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 blah. And you just redirect. If any of you have toddlers at home, think of it as dealing with your toddler. Redirect. Don't lose your temper, and redirect. All right. So last point. And by the way, in terms of this, I know that many of you are very, very anxious about this, and rightly so. I mean, in my career, I was asked all kinds of crazy questions that were very demoralizing and very distressing in terms of my being able to cope with them and my keeping my focus and my concentration and so on. So this is one that I really want you to look at my book. I have an entire chapter on outrageous questions. I give you a bunch of examples of different kinds of outrageous questions, and I give you a bunch of scripts of how to answer them. So please refer to that. All right. So now, what to wear? The most important thing is that you have some decent interview clothes that are going to be a notch up from what you normally wear if you're a typical grad student, which means you're going to get out of your yoga pants and out of your jeans and out of your T-shirt, and you're going to actually have something that is somewhat formal. Now, how formal? That's really an open question. So bear with me while I try to break this down a little bit. If you're in a field like poli-sci or econ, those are very formal fields. If you're in a field like anthropology or sociology, they're not super formal. If you're in a field like art history, it's really not formal. Then it's like really arty, right, and really hipster. So there are these gradations based on field. But it isn't just field. It's also geography. So if you're interviewing in the South or the Eastern Seaboard, well, those are fairly formal locations. If you're interviewing in the Midwest, somewhat less formal. If you're interviewing in California, much less formal. And if you're interviewing in the Pacific Northwest, where I live and started my career at Oregon or University of Washington, then it's the least formal of all. So now you have this odd calculus where it's like, well, I'm in poli-sci, but I'm interviewing at Oregon. Or I'm in English, but I'm interviewing at Yale. And you have to actually really study and use that website again and really use, use your connections in the field and your mentors to help you figure out what the right thing is to wear. But whatever you wear, please make sure it fits you at your current weight. Don't use the suit that you wore to your sister's wedding 5 years ago and assume that it's going to fit you, because it probably isn't. So please, try that thing on. Have someone objective tell you if it doesn't fit, which it probably doesn't. And then go out and buy something new or something used that looks new, and make sure that it is something that looks professional and fits you correctly at the current moment. All right. So it is time to wrap up. So I want to thank you for joining me today. I hope this was helpful to you. And I will be migrating over to the Q&A at this link here in the groups, the discussion groups, and I will be happy to answer further questions that you have. And please do come back a month from today to hear more about Job Talk. Bye-bye.